The United States has just crossed another red line in the North Atlantic, this time aimed not at an adversary, but at a NATO ally's territory. This isn't about defense in the abstract. It's about control of Arctic geography, of mineral rights, of the rules of the alliance itself. And if this sounds familiar, that's because it is. Here's what happened with specifics on January 7th, 2026. Reporting said Secretary of State Marco Rubio plans to meet Danish leaders next week, even as he signaled the administration is not retreating from President Donald Trump's goal of acquiring Greenland. Rubio told reporters that Trump retained the option to pursue the objective by military means, while saying diplomacy is preferred aid as a diplomat. He said they prefer to settle it in other ways. The White House messaging is the key accelerant. The press secretary said all options are always on the table, while also claiming diplomacy is the first option. Separate reporting noted earlier messaging that left explicit room for military options, language that has alarmed Denmark and Europe, not least because the U.S. already has extensive defense access on the island. Then on January 4, 2026, reporting described Denmark's prime minister, Mette Frederiksen, publicly urging Washington to stop escalating annexation rhetoric. Trump was quoted saying the U.S. needs Greenland for defense. Frederiksen responded that the U.S. has no right to annex Danish territories and called on Washington to stop the threats, while Denmark's ambassador emphasized territorial integrity. One more crucial detail. This is happening in the shadow of a dramatic U.S. action in Venezuela that heightened European fears. Washington's threats are not merely theatrical. The reporting noted that the weekend U.S. military operation rekindled concerns about U.S. intentions toward Greenland. So the immediate context is stark. The U.S. is publicly discussing the acquisition by purchase or otherwise of a self-governing territory of a NATO ally, while insisting it's about security. Let me be clear. And the alliance cannot function if one member hints it may seize the territory of another. Now, step back. We've seen this movie before, different geography, same script, pressure, coercion, legal justifications after the fact, and acclaimed security necessity that magically aligns with strategic advantage. In 1953, the CIA overthrew Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Power politics dressed up as stability and strategic necessity. In 1954, the CIA helped remove Guatemala's Jacobo Camur-Benz, and again under the banner of security, while protecting strategic interests. In 1973, Charles Salvador Allende was overthrown in a U.S.-backed coup, with Washington insisting it was defending freedom while crushing sovereign democratic choice. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq on claims that collapsed under scrutiny, unleashing regional chaos on a catastrophic scale. In 2011, Libya was shattered by intervention, sold as humanitarian necessity, with state collapse the predictable outcome. In 2014, Ukraine became the arena for high stakes geopolitical confrontation, with great powers treating a country's fate as a bargaining chip in a larger strategic contest. And you don't have to accept any single analogy in full to recognize the through line. Washington repeatedly treats sovereignty as conditional when convenient, negotiable when not. And the pattern is unmistakable. And Greenland fits the modern version of the template. And we're only not a regime change operation in the classic sense yet, but a coercive demand aimed at territorial outcome, backed by ambiguity about force, wrapped in the language of defense. If you are Denmark or Germany or France, the message is chillingly simple. Your security guarantee is now paired with an ultimatum. What is really at stake here? Greenland is not just ice and distance. It is the world's largest island with a total area around 2 million square kilometers, about 57,000 people, and roughly 81% ice coverage, meaning small population lives on the coastal margins of an enormous strategic landmass. Strategically, Greenland sits between North America and Europe along critical North Atlantic approaches. Reporting underscored that Greenland's location has mattered to U.S. ballistic missile early, warning and defense for decades, and the U.S. already maintains a permanent presence at Pitifik Space Base under long-standing agreements with Denmark. The U.S. Space Force describes Pitufik's radar mission in plain terms: missile warning, missile defense, and space domain awareness around the clock. Economically, there's the mineral story. Reporting described Greenland as mineral rich and emphasized deposits of critical raw materials that matter for high-tech supply chains. It is not accidental that the rhetoric of national security now include supply chains and minerals. In the 21st century, defense is often the umbrella word for strategic control over resources and geography. And here is the deeper point. The U.S. already has broad access, pointed to defense treaties signed in 1951 and 2023 that provide the U.S. Extensive military access on the island. If access is already so robust, why escalate to ownership talk, annexation talk, military option talk? Because ownership is power. Ownership is permanence. Ownership says we decide. It is the language of empire, polished for television, but still empire. Now we come to the legal reality, because alliances and peace rest on law, not vibes. Article 2 of the United Nations Charter prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. uh, when the White House floats that the U.S. military is always an option, and when senior officials refuse to clearly rule out force that is not casual talk, it it is a threat framework. Denmark is not a failed state. Greenland is not terra nullius. Greenland is a self-governing region within the kingdom of Denmark and with a recognized legal status and a lawful path. If Greenlanders choose and toward independence through a referendum-based process, reporting noted Greenland's autonomy and the ability since 2009 to pursue independence through a self-rule process requiring a referendum and Danish parliamentary approval. So if Washington frames this as defense, it is still a matter of international law, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. You cannot claim you are defending the rules-based order in one theater while threatening to append it in another. And then there is NATO itself. NATO is not merely a weapons club. It is a political commitment among states that their borders are not to be rewritten by coercion. Reporting described Frederickson warning that a U.S. takeover would amount to the end of an extraordinary statement from a Nordic leader and a sign of how seriously this is being taken. Of inside the United States, even senior Republicans are warning this is reckless. Reporting quoted Senator Mitch McConnell calling threats and intimidation unseemly and warning that using force to seize the sovereign democratic territory of a loyal ally would be an especially catastrophic act of strategic self-harm. That isn't left versus right. That's the establishment recognition that coercion against an ally detonates the credibility of every treaty Washington expects others to honor. Greenland is not a chessboard. It is home to roughly 57,000 people, many of them indigenous Inuit, living across a vast, harsh environment with limited infrastructure and no roads between many towns. The human cost of strategic games is often invisible until it isn't militarization pressures, political destabilization, the undermining of local self-determination, and the ever-present risk of miscalculation. Reporting also detailed historical scars of forced relocations in the 1950s and abuses tied to reproductive coercion across decades. These are not abstractions, and they are lived traumas that make big power decisions about Greenland's fate morally fraught. When great powers posture, ordinary people become collateral damage socially, economically, psychologically, even before a shot is fired. That is why coercive rhetoric is not harmless. It is a siege engine aimed at legitimacy. This is a diplomatic crisis with consequences of the gravest kind, precisely because it strikes at NATO's foundation, the mutual respect for borders among allies. Washington normalizes threats against Danish territory. It invites every rival power to say, if the West does it, why can't we? So What should we watch next? First, Rubio's meeting timing and readout. The critical question won't be the smiles. It will be whether the U.S. clarifies an official posture that rules out force or whether it keeps the all options ambiguity as leverage. Second, EU and allied coordination. Reporting said France's foreign minister indicated France is working with partners on a response plan and would raise it with Germany and Poland. That signals an unusual level of allied contingency planning because allies are treating U.S. rhetoric as operationally meaningful. Third, NATO cohesion signals. Watch whether NATO statements harden around sovereignty language and whether Denmark hints at leverage through existing base agreements, especially given the expanded U.S. access Denmark has granted in recent years. Fourth, U.S. domestic constraints. Reporting described pushback in Congress, including talk of legislation to rein in any attempt at seizure. That matters because foreign policy is not only made abroad, it is contested at home. Fifth, Greenland's own political trajectory. Reporting emphasized Greenland's legal pathway toward independence and the caution among Greenlanders about trading one dependency for another. Any move that treats Greenland as an object rather than a people will intensify resistance, not reduce it. Let me end where we began. If this sounds familiar, that's because it is. States is testing whether the post-1945 order applies even when Washington wants something badly. If it doesn't, if coercion becomes normalized inside the alliance, then the damage won't be limited to Denmark or Greenland. It will reverberate across every treaty line and every fragile piece